everyone, and welcome back to Rebel Eaters Club Listen and React. So, today you'll notice it's not a craft video, it's just some game footage. I've been doing crochet and embroidery, which isn't so easy to record because I watch TV while I do it. So, I hope the video game footage is okay as the video for today. So, we're going to listen to probably around the first half of the first episode of the Rebel Eaters Club, which is called All Food is Good Food with Mia Fear. I don't know if I said her last name correctly, but we will find out.
It's December 1992, Christmas time. I'm 10 years old and writing furiously into the pages of my little pink diary, venting about dinner. Dear diary, today Grandma gave us tamales for dinner. They smelled so good. Why does she always do this to me? Doesn't she understand that I'm the fattest girl in my entire school? And it's because she's always tempting me with food? Love always, XOXO, me. In the Mexican household I grew up in, December was high tamale season. We'd make them for family and give them away as gifts too. And they were legendary. My grandmother and grandfather used to sit down in a mini production line and make dozens of tamales. Each one is like a tiny present of spicy meat and earthy masa wrapped in papery corn husks. My mouth is watering just thinking about them now. But back then, tamales were the bane of my existence. I was a little fat girl who was being bullied relentlessly for her weight, and food was enemy number one. The better it tasted, the more dangerous it was. A threat to becoming different, better, thin. If I could just be thin, I thought I'd be happy. I'd get the love and attention I always craved from the boys at school.
So far, I'm actually not having a real problem with what's being presented here. I do think there's a little over description of food again, but it wasn't sexualized, so it not so bad. And to a degree, I believe this as a kid who was also chubby. I would get so upset when someone would make like my favorite dish or bring like my favorite treat into the house, because it's like, how am I supposed to resist that? So I can end that whole thing about, being thin would kind of fix all of your problems. As a teenager, yes, that was my mentality. Early teenager, I want to say between the ages of about 12 to 14 is where, like, middle school, very, very beginning high school years is when that mentality was strong, at least in me. I could even see how this mentality could last throughout high school. If this point being made is that this is what diet culture does, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I think that there is a high pressure, and perhaps diet culture could have an argument made for kids, especially with like Teen Vogue and stuff, and some of the stuff you see in those magazines, at least when I was growing up. I could see that. If they're trying to extrapolate those experiences, though, to adult life, that's where things get a little hazy for me. But let's see where they go.
I thought being fat meant ugliness, a loveless future. Those delicious tamales meant staying fat, failing at being thin, and failing at all the other things that seemed to be wrong with me. Like the Mexican home that made me feel like I was an alien at school. The words I would mispronounce because my grandmother said them differently. The rituals that kept us from being real Americans. My feelings about those tamales were all about my relationship to culture, family, tradition, immigration, and race. Food is powerful that way.
Food is powerful that way. Actually, so here's the thing. I was actually with her up until she said food is powerful that way. Food definitely has a direct link to culture. But her expression of like some of the other culture items of her pronouncing words differently and them having their own rituals, and that kind of othered her a bit from her peers, or at least that's what she referred to as keeping them from being true Americans. And generally from some of the stuff that we've read in her book and stuff, I'm getting a sense that she was very othered as a kid, which I can see. As many of you know, I taught in uh, English as a second language class for a elementary and middle school, and that was a genuine thing that some of those kids had to experience, is other kids making fun of the way they talk, which is really unfortunate, and that there were many conversations had around that. Same with traditions. We had some kids that came from a culture where Halloween was kind of seen as evil, and to the point where those kids stayed home on Halloween for fear of another child coming dressed up as a character, because it was so far against their religion and their culture that they could not even look at that another kid getting dressed up or having anything spooky around. So I could see how that was a challenge for her, and my heart goes out to her for that. That being said, it's incredibly reductive to boil all of culture and all of this into food. Don't get me wrong, food is definitely a big part of culture, but it's not the only part, and it's not necessarily the biggest part depending on which culture you have. That's my perspective though.
I'm Virgie Tovar, and this is Rebel Eaters Club. It's a show where I talk to incredible people about our relationships to food and all the things wrapped up in eating, like self-esteem, sex, community, love. I am a fat woman of color, and I hated my body for a long time. I was terrified of food for nearly 20 years. But finally, one day, I gave the finger to diet culture.
Honestly, I'm not sure she was ever terrified of food. If I'm being completely honest, and I don't mean to discount any experiences that she had, I fully believe that there was a time where she hated her body. Um, I don't know if I would say she was afraid of food just from how much, because the way she romanticizes food is not, and sometimes sexualizes food, and the constant describing of food is not anything like an average person I've ever seen. So I find it very hard to believe that she was ever afraid of food. I think she definitely struggled with body image issues, and perhaps had that, what we saw a few minutes ago with the hating that her favorite food was in the house while she was trying to lose weight and stuff. I don't know if I would qualify that as a fear.
But what is diet culture? In the US, the weight loss industry has grown to $72 billion a year. That's
Again, weight loss industry, and not referencing the fast food industry or the highly processed packaged foods and how much they make. Nope, we're just going to focus on the weight loss industry because it furthers our narrative.
that's 72 billion. This culture is constantly telling us that all our problems would be solved if only we ate less.
Disagree. Completely disagree. I think that's something that's said about a lot of like medical issues, like diabetes, hypertension, those sort of things, high cholesterol, those sort of things would be better moderated with weight loss. But outside of like teenage years, I've never come across an adult with a mentality, or even the perception that they're getting this from our general culture, that being thin will solve all problems. Being rich will solve all problems. That's something that I've definitely gotten, and to a degree, I agree with. Um, but being thin outside of adolescence was never like the be all end all that I got. It was definitely seen as important, and is still seen as important, but it's not like the cure all for your life. I've never gotten that. Like I've gotten the impression that it's very important to be thin, but not that it will solve problems.
Diet culture shows up in workout clothing companies that tell you to find your shine, in keto cookbooks on the bestseller list, in the way coworkers can't seem to share a meal without talking.
Okay, so a quick note about the keto thing. Let's not pretend that fad diets, there's plenty of people that still do keto through and through, and more power to you. But let's not pretend, like, for each fad diet, there's also, like, a fad food thing going on. Like, while there was keto, there was also possibly even born from keto, was this big bacon craze where there was bacon shit everywhere. I hate bacon, so I was really annoyed by the whole fad. Where like it was bacon flavored this and bacon flavored that, and here's bacon band-aids and bacon on t-shirts, and like, it was just as there is a fad diet, there is a fad food as well. Like, there's a balance there. Let's not ignore one half of the coin, please, or one side of the coin.
Talking about the gym, the way fat people are treated like second-class citizens. Every year, 48 million Americans go on a diet, but not everyone is calling it a diet. People might call it wellness or a healthy lifestyle, but diet culture.
Okay, sorry, real quick though. So all these people go on diets. What does that have anything to fucking do with you? Why is that such a bad thing? If people want, and so what if they're calling it wellness and lifestyle changes? Maybe for them that's what it is. Maybe for them that's what it is. What it doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect you. Leave them alone. Leave people alone. It's not hurting you.
Culture is everywhere, and it's destructive. So we're going to break up with diet culture, one corn dog at a time, and you will salivate and have feelings and new thoughts. At the end of every episode, there will be a question I want you to journal about. The more you know about your history with food and eating, the better equipped you are to finally break up with diet culture. Are you ready? Today, we're going to talk to my friend Mia Foyer about her food frenemy, bagels.
I brought some bagels and some schmear. Is it schmear or how do you say it?
Well, I have never heard anyone call it schmear until I moved to the U.S. But in Winnipeg, where I grew up, where I ate my earliest bagel, it was just cream cheese.
Okay.
For Mia, bagels are all tied up with some of her most important relationships, with her mother, her heritage, and herself.
Okay. So are you ready? Should we do? Oh my God, I just dropped a bunch of cream cheese on my lap. It's fine. I'm just going to eat it off.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do it. Let's do it.
Although, I gotta say, I long for a toaster.
Yum.
I met Mia when she came to Babe Camp, one of my weekend-long workshops on fat feminism. Since then, she's become a friend. She's a Canadian and a total badass sculptor. When we sat down in the studio to eat some bagels, she started telling me about her childhood in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
So I grew up in a Jewish house, Jewish grandparents. I went to a Jewish school. And so I was really kind of steeped in a Jewish community. And with that came a lot of Jewish cooking, like a lot of things like knishes and balinces and corned beef sandwiches and pickles and bagels, and brisket and chicken soup and matzo balls. And bagels were glorious. And the ones that my mom bought at Safeway in Winnipeg were not fancy. They were not these like beautiful bagels that I've had in Montreal or in New York.
Yeah.
They were like out of a plastic bag that, were made in a factory,
Yeah.
that came in frozen on a truck. They were the industrialized bagel for the middle class family who lived in like the middle of Canada. And I remember lying in bed and I would think like, Oh, I cannot wait to wake up and eat a toasted bagel with cheese whiz. That was like the ultimate. That was like my fantasy. I would go to bed. I was so excited to wake up and have breakfast.
And to me, that seems where there's like that unhealthy relationship with food a little bit. Don't get me wrong, I understand being excited for a meal that your family has maybe once a year. Like it's the big holiday meal that you're like there's a lot of people that get excited for Thanksgiving. I don't particularly care for Thanksgiving food. It's okay, but I don't get excited for it. But my family has a New Year's tradition where a couple of family members will spend all day making lumpia and pancit, and it's fucking delicious. And we only have it once a year because it's so much fucking work. But I look forward to that lumpia. I don't look forward or get excited about like my everyday breakfast the next day. I think that, I mean, granted, she's saying she's a kid during this time, so maybe again though, even as a kid, I never handled eggs or like big meals well first thing in the morning. So I've always stuck with either protein bars or now I do a protein shake every morning because I just can't handle anything super heavy first thing in the morning. But when I was a kid, there was like every 4 months or so, my mom would make these Pillsbury orange rolls that they still have them. I don't think they're as fantastic as I did when I was a kid, but I would look forward to those and get excited for those the next morning. Again, though, like my everyday food the next morning, I never got excited for it. Like, I don't know, I just think that's a little weird.
And then because of the fact that my family is full of larger bodied people, men and women, I learned how to hate my body from my mother, who hated her body. And then I hated her body, and I hated my body, and I hated my cousins' bodies and my aunt's bodies. But my dad became almost like this cop around the house. And he put a picture on our fridge. I don't know if you remember, Virgie, but like there was these birthday cards that came out in the 80s of fat women or like super fat women in bikinis holding a cupcake. And then it was meant to be funny, you know, but it was hurtful. So he put one of those on our fridge as like a reminder to everybody in the house, me, my brother, and my mother, that, you know, if you open up this door, just remember this body right here could be you. He would tell me that I had to do like X number of minutes on the stair climber every night. Like there was so much fear being hurled at me.
Okay, so I actually have some layered ideas about that. You learned to hate your body because your mother hated her body. I can actually see this. My mother also very much hated her body, and I think I internalized that from a young age because she was very expressive about it from a young age. And those exact cards that she's talking about, she would use for inspiration and look at while she worked out. And it really bothered me as a kid. It really, like, upset me. I don't remember why, but it did. And so I can see how there's some of that generational stuff rather than approaching this from a healthy way of we are not eating well, we're not taking the right portions and that sort of thing. It becomes more of a hatred circle of like self-hatred circle and a self-hatred cycle that is then passed on to the next generation. I can actually see that. I can actually see that pretty well. The so much time on the stair climber each night. Really funny thing, my mom would make me get on the treadmill most days for, I think it was a minimum of 30 minutes, but I was allowed to watch TV while I was on. And honestly, I actually don't think that that's a bad move for a parent. Granted, I was I was homeschooled, so I didn't. That was my gym. That it was probably slightly different, but I don't necessarily think her father was wrong to say you should be on the stair climber or whatever they had so many minutes each night, especially if it was like 30 minutes or something really reasonable. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, and I think because so many hobbies and so many things people do now are very sedentary, and if she just wasn't a naturally actively inclined child, then that's getting her a little bit of extra movement was probably a good thing.
As I was just sort of approaching puberty, I wasn't even like 13 yet. Not soon after that, I actually remember sort of telling myself that I should not be so excited about eating bagels because of the fact that like I was receiving very strong messages around food, around eating.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Because there's so much there's morality tied into all of it.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about when food stops being something that you enjoy or something that you use for nutrition, right? Like there's a range of reasons why humans and animals eat, right?
Yeah.
And I would say all of them are natural, but then you add this cultural level where food becomes tied to morality in our culture.
Yeah.
And also our relationship to food culturally is very seated in anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think most people think that most food is either dangerous or bad for you.
Yeah.
And
I would disagree with that. I don't think most people think that most food is dangerous or bad for you. Maybe you think that if all you eat is like fast food and shit, then yeah, most of that stuff is bad for you. But I don't think that most people believe that most food is dangerous or bad for you. I think that's a hyperbolic statement, quite frankly, which I don't think she intends it as a hyperbolic statement. I think she's completely serious, but I think that's misleading, and I disagree with it.
So when you have that moral overlay, all of a sudden you start to see really strange behavior.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that, like I witness so much of that on a day-to-day basis, right? Like there's this kind of understanding of what you're supposed to do when someone else is watching and what you want to do.
Oh, I feel like I have been in so many situations where I am performing. If I'm at an art opening and there's like a big table full of delicious food, but I'm surrounded by colleagues and other people from in the art world, forget it. I'm just going to nibble at the smallest thing possible. Why? Even if I'm hungry? Because I all of a sudden fall into this weird trap of feeling scrutinized by everyone around me. And that scrutiny is somehow linked to what I'm eating.
Yes.
And also, I mean,
okay, this one I kind of understand what they're saying, but I derive something completely different. There are situations when there's like food available and I would take less than normal, and the reason that I do that, and I don't know if this is the same reason that they do it and they're just misinterpreting why they're doing what they're doing, or perhaps they have a genuinely different motivation. I don't know. But for me, I always took less because I don't want to be seen as greedy for taking more than my share. I wanted to make sure that I was leaving enough for there to be enough to go around, because if I really like something and I'm not like monitoring myself, I'll eat it and eat it and eat it and eat it and eat it. And that's become less so now that I've been like more staying on a diet and more focused on making better choices for myself. That's not so much an issue anymore, but there was a time when I would just eat and eat and eat and eat, and I would, especially if something that I didn't typically get or anything like that, I would eat more than my share. And at some point during my late teen years, I realized that that was quite selfish of me, because there are other people there that would probably like some, and I might be taking more than my share, and that's not fair. So that was my interpretation of why I was eating less, not because I was afraid of judgment for eating, but because I was afraid of judgment for being greedy. But that, again, something you're going to hear me say again and again with these podcast commentaries is, that's me. That's my perspective. So
How many dates have I been on in my lifetime where I'm ordering food across the table from somebody who I think is judging me based on how much I eat or what I order? I'm happy to say that I've sort of shaken a lot of that bullshit off, but
Yeah.
in my life, it's been a constant. And then another thing I was thinking of, back to the bagels, is so my mother and the women of my family go to Weight Watchers. This is something that has been a constant, since I could remember. My mother has been going to Weight Watchers until she started bringing me with her to Weight Watchers. And then I went on my own to Weight Watchers as soon as I was old enough. But they would make bagels. There would be I remember every once in a while in my household growing up, the bagel brand would shift to be 2-point bagels from Weight Watchers.
Wow.
And they were sort of disgusting and they were smaller, but you still kind of got to saw them in half and put them in the toaster, and they became toasty. And then my mother at one point found a recipe to make 1-point bagels that were made out of, oh God, there was fat-free yogurt and who knows. That was the ultimate.
Okay, I gotta hand it to her. Those, not all. There have been a couple that have been good, but most recipes that try to take an unhealthy food and make it healthy suck. They do, especially if you're comparing them to the original. Yeah, they're not nearly as satisfying. The key is to not focus so much on getting a healthy version of the food that you like, but to find healthy foods that you like, and then indulge in the unhealthy foods that you like every once in a while. You miss the unhealthy foods far less when you do that. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people that are new to healthier eating get trapped in, is they want the foods that they like. And I completely get that. You want the foods that you like. You want what's familiar. But trying to make healthy versions of those foods is almost always disappointing. It's better to find healthy foods that you like, healthy meals that you like, healthy recipes that you like, and then schedule in some unhealthy foods. Budget in your calorie content, some unhealthy foods.
They're only 1 point. Weight Watchers, and as I got older, and I moved out, and I moved out of Canada, and I went to grad school. I felt like I was deeply struggling in terms of what I was allowing myself to eat. What I ended up falling into at that point was no bagels ever. I had loved them once so much, and I knew it, and I just felt like if I eat a bagel, it's over. Don't ever order a bagel. Don't ever eat a bagel. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. For years.
Whoa.
I know.
I'm having a recollection of something my mother taught me when I was a fat little girl who was getting, emotionally abused and bludgeoned day after day for being fat. I remember we were...
So here's the thing. I fully believe that Bridgie was bullied and was probably called names. And I don't even find it wrong to call that emotional abuse, because kids can be very cruel. But I think emotionally bludgeoned every day. For some reason, that statement irritates me, because it's taking it I went and was emotionally abused every day by my peers. There's something about the bludgeon that takes it to another level for me, that it just is okay, look, I understand about being bullied for your weight. I get it. For the brief amount of time I wasn't homeschooled my entire school year, there was a time that I was in school, and I was teased and bullied for being overweight myself. And it can be very cruel, and there was a group of girls that would actively ignore what I was saying, act like they couldn't understand what I was saying, walk away, and laugh at me. I don't, whether that was because of my weight or just because I was their target because I had low self-esteem, I don't fucking know. I would not classify that as emotionally bludgeoned every day. There's just something so violent about bludgeoned, where abuse feels more like you're calling it what it is. You know, it was a systematic action by one or more people to cause you harm. I agree. I think that happened to you, and I'm sorry that it did, and I know that it was painful. Bludgeon takes it to another level where it feels like should be more criminal or something.
We were sitting in her car and I was crying, and I just felt like I was so disgusted by my body. I remember taking her hand and putting it on the inside of my thigh and making her feel the stretch marks and telling her that there was something wrong with me. There was something that normal people don't have this, that, you know, my life would be better if I was the kind of person who didn't have, you know, like it was such a physical memory of like, look at my defect, feel it, like feel what it looks like to feel the little tear under the skin where the stretch mark happens, you know? And, you know, I think that she felt really overwhelmed and unable to guide me in that moment.
Yeah.
And so she leaned on her own dieting and disordered eating cache of information and tips or whatever. And she said that the key to becoming thin was learning to hate the foods you loved the most.
Whoa.
And like that kind of, I mean, that reminds me so
Yeah.
much of what you're talking about, where it's like that inversion, where
Yeah.
it's like where the thing you love the most is the biggest danger.
Yeah.
If that happened, there's something, again, extreme about that statement, but I could still actually see, like, a mother that took something too far saying that. And I find that unfortunate. And if that's where Virgie's basing a lot of her activism on, I can kind of understand it, because that is its own unhealthy relationship with food.
To who you can and should become.
Yeah.
But that's what, I mean, that's
Yeah.
what's,
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
like, that's also part, like her teaching me how to have an eating disorder
Yeah.
was part of feminine intimacy in our culture.
Right.
It wasn't like somehow like, oh, this beautiful moment of like feminine intimacy where a
Yeah.
mother is passing something on to it. It
Yeah.
was like all that awful diet culture shit
Yeah.
is as much a part of gender as like my mother.
Honestly, I kind of think that her mother just took things to the extreme. And unfortunately, because that's Virgie's baseline, she views this as all of culture. It's coming a little bit clearer now why she thinks the way she does. It's unfortunate, but I don't think that this was a matter of diet culture so much as her mother taking something too far.
Mother touching my body. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, it's all connected, right?
I completely agree.
Well, it's like, it's interesting, right? Because like there's this cultural mechanism. The family is attempting to use food the way that humans use food, which is to celebrate, to create intimacy, to feed and nurture. And then there's this weird moralistic diet culture thing that's kind of stepping in and it's like interesting, right? Because I see the trajectory of family and how food is central to that, and then there's this weird thing that kind of interrupts.
Yeah.
Another story that feels really resonant.
So before they get into the next story, I do want to address that, because you say that that's part of family, is that intimacy of sharing a meal. While I agree with that to an extent, I think a bigger sense of intimacy and bonding within a family likely came from the cooking portion and sharing in the process, and then sharing in the meal. And because so much food is so processed now, that step has kind of been taken away. So I think that there's a little bit of an overemphasis on the sharing the meal part, and not understanding what else precipitated that, and not understanding also how that has changed over the years with the prevalence of fast food, breakneck speed for work and life, and our poor work-life balances. So, and I know that I tend to come from a more financial perspective on these things. Like, I've noticed in myself that a lot of things that Virgie says, I offer a different interpretation of why these things are happening. And so perhaps it's just a matter of a difference in philosophy, and some of you are likely to disagree with me as well, and that's totally cool. I get that, but that think that while Virgie is overly focused on like diet culture and where the fault is, she's not taking into consideration other possible mechanisms that are in place with that.
With what you're talking about with your family and your mother is like, I remember, distinctly writing in my diary these like hate letters to my grandmother because I was so angry at her for making delicious food.
Whoa.
That I felt tempted me, that I felt, like if she could just stop making this food, that I could be the right size.
Yeah.
And I think what's so interlaced with that and what's so intense about that is that, my grandmother, my family is Mexican, right?
Yeah.
Like my family. So like, I'm learning that this particular kind of like Anglo streamlined Norwegian body is the ideal body.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing my Mexican grandmother who's making the food that I'm connecting with home, but also connecting with my racialization as evil.
Me too, Virgie. Me too. The bagel, there was something so Jewish about it. And I not only hated my body, but I hated my Jewish body.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there. We're halfway through now, and this is nearly 40 minutes long. It might be a little less by the time I edit everything, but I actually have a couple things to add, so it's still probably going to be over 40 minutes. So we're going to stop it there. On their last points, though, I do just want to say there are thin Mexican women and there are thin Jewish women. It's not necessarily, I think, equating body shape with culture is very unfortunate because it sets this predetermination, which I guess kind of follows with the whole fat logic thing where everything is entirely genetic, even though it's not. But so far, I haven't had a whole lot to say. I mean, I have talked a fair amount. We're only 16 minutes into the episode, and this is so far nearly 39 minutes long, so I've clearly talked plenty. But a lot of this seems to be their personal perspectives and their personal stories. And so there's not a whole lot to really critique about it. It might change as we go on, though, so I would like to keep listening to this podcast, and we'll finish this episode next week. So let me know what you think about this so far. I'm very curious. Quick update, since I forgot to do that in the Wednesday video. I'm up a pound back up to 186. I'm not too worried about it, though, because I've been following my plan pretty well, and I think this is just a natural weight fluctuation. Manga and anime front, I have finished Devil's Line. Fantastic, by the way. Like, it went from this not weird, but it went from this kind of vampire romance type thing into a full-on, like, secret organization by the government meant to kill people. Like, it went so far in a different direction, and it was very good. I will say that the last 2 volumes, because it was covering so many different perspectives, because there were so many players in at that point, it became a little more difficult to read because it kept jumping to perspectives to see which group of characters you're going to focus on next. But it was still really good, and I would highly recommend it. I also finished Maid-sama. Oh my god, ended wonderfully. I loved it. So, highly recommend Maid-sama, like the manga too. The anime was okay. The manga was very good. The manga was awesome, and I would highly recommend it. So, I think that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Actually, fairly short update stuff for me. I had some family visiting this week, so it was a little harder to get things recorded and out. Hopefully everything came out on time. But thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.